Hello everyone, I am Deiparine, and please join me today as I discuss the continuation of the chapter 10. And so what are we waiting for? Let's go!
Aptitude test. We are all constantly acquiring information through everyday life experiences and formal learning experiences, such as the coursework in our school. The primary difference between the achievement test and the aptitude test is that aptitude tests tend to focus more on informal learning or life experiences, and in contrast, achievement tests tend to focus on the learning that has occurred due to relatively structured input. So, at least on the face of it, item 1 appears to be more dependent on formal learning experiences than item 2. So, item 1 is a correlation of 0.7 between variables x and y in a predictive validity. Study accounts for what percentage of the variance. Item 2 is small letter O is to big O, as small letter x is to what? So, the successful completion of item 1 hinges on familiarity with the concept of correlation and the knowledge that the variance accounted for by a correlation coefficient is equal to the square of the coefficient. So in this case, the 0.7 to the power of 2 or the 0.49 mo na siya ang answer. The letter D. So ang answer is the 49. And the successful completion of item 2 requires experience with the concept of sizes as well as the ability to grasp the concept of analogies. So the latter abilities tend to be gleaned from the life experiences. So, witness, di ba kay, mas mauna man dyan na to og maansiran ang number 2 kay kanang kuan ra man gud siya, easy ra siya sa atua kay ipares ra nato siya kay kanang sa ato kong life experience nga ang dako og ang gamay i-partner. Unlike sa number 1 is maglisod ta kay kinahanglan familiar ta sa concept sa katong correlation coefficient. So, interestingly, the level achievement or aptitude for a test may depend not only on the types of items contained in the test but also on the intended use of the test. So, possible siya nga for the two tests containing same or similar items nga matawag siya og different name. One could be labeled as an aptitude test or one could be labeled as an achievement test. So, depende lang daw siya kung unsa ang atuang gamitan sa isa ka test. So, aptitude tests, also referred to as prognostic tests, are typically used to make predictions also. Some aptitude tests have been used to measure readiness to enter a particular preschool program, enter a elementary school, successfully complete a challenging course of study in secondary school, and successfully complete college level work, and also successfully complete graduate level work and including a course of study at a professional or trade school. And also, achievement test may also be used for predictive purposes. For example, a measure of achievement in a course entitled Basic Conversational French might be used as a predictor of achievement for a course entitled Advanced Conversational French. So, syempre, once nga mag-excel ka sa basic subject, so therefore ma-predict nato na mas mag-excel siya sa advanced nga subjects. At the preschool and elementary school level, you may hear references to readiness test. Here, readiness presumably refers to the physical factors, personality factors, and other factors that are judged necessary for a child to be ready to learn. And as the level of education climbs, however, the term readiness is dropped in the favor of the term aptitude. So this despite the fact that readiness is very much implied at all levels. So for example, the graduate record examination given in college and used as a predictor of ability to do the graduate level work might have been called the GSRE or the Graduate School Readiness Examination. So, are you ready to learn about the readiness for learning at the preschool? The first 5 years of life, the span of time referred to as the preschool period, is a time of profound change. Basic reflexes develop and the child passes a number of sensory motor milestones, such as crawling, sitting, standing, walking, running, and grasping. And usually between 18 to 14 months, the child becomes capable of symbolic thought and develops language skills. By the age 2, the average child has a vocabulary of more than 200 words. And of course, all such observation about the development of children are of more than mere academic interest to professionals charged with the responsibility of psychological assessment. So, at the preschool level, such assessment is largely a matter of determining whether a child's cognitive, emotional, and social development is in line with the age-related expectation and whether any problems likely to hamper learning ability are evident. So, in the mid-1970s, Congress enacted Public Law PL 94-142, which mandated that the professional evaluation of children aged 3 and older suspected of having physical or mental disabilities in order to determine their special educational needs. So the law also provided federal funds to help states meet those needs. And in 1986, a set of amendments to PL 94-142, known as PL 99-457, extended downward to birth the obligation of states toward children with disabilities. It further mandated that beginning with the school year 1990 to 1991, all disabled children from ages 3 to 5 were to be provided with a free, appropriate education. And the law was expanded in the scope in 1987 with the passage of PL 105-17. Among other things, the PL 105-17 was intended to give greater attention to diversity issues, especially as a factor in evaluation and assignment of special services. PL 105-17 also mandated that the infants and toddlers with disabilities must receive services in home or in other natural settings, and that such services were to be continued in preschool programs. And lastly, in 1999, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder or the ADHD was officially listed under otherwise health impaired in IDEA as a disabling condition that can qualify a child for special services. And these combined with other federal legislation and a growing movement toward full-service schools that dispense health and psychological services in addition to education, and signaled a growing societal reliance on infant and preschool assessment techniques. The tools of preschool assessment are age-appropriate variation built into them, the same types of tools used to assess school-aged children and adults. So these tools include, among others, checklists and rating scales, tests, and interviews. So checklists and rating scales are tools of assessment commonly used with preschoolers, although their use is certainly not exclusive to this population. So in general, a checklist is a questionnaire on which marks are made to indicate the presence or absence of a specified behavior, thought, event, or circumstances. So the individual doing the checking of the boxes in a checklist may be a professional such as a psychologist or a teacher, an observer such as a parent or caretaker, or even the subject of the checklist himself or herself. So checklists can cover a wide array of item content and still be relatively economical and quick to administer. So a rating scale is quite similar in definition and sometimes even identical in form to a checklist. So the definitional differences between the two terms are technically rather subtle and for all practical purposes blurred. So the difference involved the degree to which actual rating is involved. So for our purposes, we will define a rating scale as a form completed by an evaluator, rater, a judge, or examiner to make judgment of relative standing with regard to a specified variable or list of variables. As with a checklist, the target judgment may have to do with the presence or absence of a particular event or even its frequency. So, have you ever been evaluated by a checklist or a rating scale? If you answered no, you are probably incorrect. So, this is because one of the very first things that most of us are greeted with upon entry to the world is a checklist related to our appearance, behavior, and overall health. So, the sum total of what might be characterized as everybody's first test is an Apgar number. So the Apgar number is a score on a rating scale developed by a physician, Virginia Apgar, an obstetrical anesthesiologist who saw a need for a simple, rapid method of evaluating newborn infants and determining what immediate action, if any, is necessary. So each evaluation is made with respect to the same 5 variables. So each variable can be scored on a range from 0 to 2 and each score at 1 minute and 5 minutes can range from 0 to 10. So the variables are heart rate, respiration, color, muscle tone, and reflex irritability. So the last measure being obtained by response to a stimulus such as a mild pinch. So for example, with respect to variable of reflex irritability, so the infant will earn a score of 2 for vigorous cry in response to the stimulus, a score for 1 for a grimace, and a score of 0 if it shows no reflex irritability. So by the way, a useful acronym for remembering the 5 variables in the Apgar is the A stands for activity or muscle tone, P for pulse or heart rate, G for grimace or reflex irritability, A for appearance or color, and R for respiration. So moving from the realm of the medical to the realm of psychological. So another evaluation, one far less formal, takes place shortly after birth by the child's mother. So ang mama na pod ang mag-evaluate ani. So according to Jodette Langlois and colleagues, studied the relationship between infant attractiveness and maternal behavior and attitude using a sample of 173 mothers and their firstborn infants, 88 girls and 87 boys. So to gauge attractiveness, the investigator used judges' ratings of photographs taken a standard distance from each infant's face while the child was either sleeping or had an otherwise neutral expression. So maternal behavior during feeding and play was directly observed by the trained raters in the hospitals. So, the researchers found that although all of the infants studied receive adequate care, the attractive infants receive more positive treatment and attitudes from their mothers than did the unattractive infants. So the mother of the attractive infants were more affectionate and playful. The mother of less attractive infants were more likely to be attentive to other people rather than to their infant. So these mothers were also more likely to engage in routine caregiving than in affectionate behavior. So we can conclude that from moments after birth and onward, evaluation, both formal and informal, is very much a fact of our life. So we may define informal evaluation as a typically non-systematic, relatively brief and off-the-record assessment leading to the formation of an opinion or attitude conducted by any person in any way for any reason in an unofficial context that is not subject to the ethics or other standards of an evaluation by a professional. So katong pag-evaluate sa mother sa ilahang children. And shifting our focus back to formal evaluation, such as the APGAR motto siya, assessors have an abundance of options when selecting a checklist or rating scale to use as screening instrument for education-related assessment. So many of these screening instruments, such as the Connors Rating Scale Revised, come in different version for use through the lifespan and designed for use from preschool through adolescence, and the ASC 3 or the Behavior Assessment System for Children 3rd edition. It utilizes teacher and parent rating to identify adaptive difficulties on scales ranging from activities of daily living to study skills. And lastly, the self-report or of personality, or the SRP. Particularly in preschool, assessment screening tools may be used as a first step in identifying children who are said to be at risk. So this term came into vague as an alternative to diagnostic labels that might have a detrimental effect. So at risk has been used to refer to preschool children who may not be ready for first grades. So the term has also been applied to children who are believed to be not functioning within normal limits. In a most general sense, at risk refers to children who have documented difficulties in one or more psychological, social, or academic areas and for whom intervention is or may be required. And the need for intervention may be decided on the basis of a more complete evaluation, often involving psychological assessment, as noted by Faith Miller in an essay that can be found only on the website. So the specific reason given for an at-risk designation can be quite varied, cited a number of possible causal factors, including the measured intelligence, temperament, personality, family life, school environment, and environmental hazards. And psychological tests at the earliest level, cognitive, emotional, and social attributes are gauged by scales that assess the presence or absence of various developmental achievements through such means as observation and parental interviews. At the age 2, child enters a challenging period for psychological assessors. Language and conceptual skills are beginning to emerge, yet the kinds of verbal and performance tests traditionally used with older children and adults are inappropriate. So the attention span of the preschooler is short, and ideally, the test materials are colorful, engaging, and attention-sustaining. Approximately 1 hour is good rule of thumb limit for an entire session or entire test session with a preschooler. So the more less ang time, the more it is preferable. Because as testing time increases, the possibility of fatigue and distraction is mag-occur. And the motivation of the young child may vary from one test session to the next, and this is something of which the examiners must be aware. Particularly desirable are tests that are relatively easy to administer and have simple start or discontinue rules. Also, very desirable are tests that allow ample opportunity to make behavioral observation. For example, the dual ESL test administration format. So, teaching item for each subtest and dichotomous scoring, so such as right or wrong daw, all may facilitate test administration with very young children. So the ESL format in the context of test administration refers to the test materials, usually some sort of book that contains test stimulus materials and that can be folded and placed on a desk. So the examiner turns the pages to reveal to the examinee, and for example, the objects to identify or design to copy. So when corresponding test administration instructions or notes are printed on the reverse side of the test stimulus pages for the examiner's convenience during test administration, and the format is sometimes referred to as what I have said last time, the dual ESL test administration format. Elementary school level. The age at which a child is mandated by law to enter varies from state to state. Yet, individual children of the same chronological age may vary wildly in how ready they are to separate from their parents and begin academic learning. So, children entering the educational system come from a wide range of background and experiences, and their rates of physiological, psychological, and social development also vary widely. The school readiness tests provide educators with a yardstick by which to assess pupils' abilities in areas as diverse as general information and sensory motor skills. How data from such yardstick are actually used will vary from country to country in accordance with many considerations including cultural traditions, and one of many instruments designed to assess children's readiness and aptitude for formal education is the Metropolitan Readiness Test or the MRTs. So, the MRTS is a test battery that assess the development of the reading and mathematics skills important in the early stages of formal school learning. The test is divided into two levels. The level 1 is individually administered for use with the beginning and middle kindergartens, and level 2 group administered, which spans the end of the kindergarten through first grade. So there are two forms of the test at each level. The tests are orally administered in several sessions and are on time, though administration time typically runs about 90 minutes. A practice test, especially useful with young children who have had minimal or no prior test-taking experience, may be administered also for several days before the actual examination to help familiarize students with the procedures and the format. So, as what I have said a while ago, there are two levels of the Metropolitan Readiness Test. The first one is the level 1 and the second one is the level 2. So, under the level 1 is the auditory memory. So, there are 4 pictures containing familiar objects are presented. The examiner will read aloud the several words while the children must select the pictures that corresponds to the same sequence of words that were presented orally. Next is rhyming. So the examiner supplies the name of each of the pictures presented and when gives a fifth word that rhymes with one of them. So the child must select the pictures that rhyme with the examiner's word. Next is the letter recognition. So, the in letter recognition, the examiner names different letters and the child must identify each from the series presented in the test booklet. Fourth is the visual matching. So, a sample will be presented and the child must select the choice that matches the sample. Fifth is the school language and listening. So, the examiner will read a sentence and the child selects the picture that describe what was read. And the task involves some inference making and awareness of relevancy of the detail. And lastly, in level 1 is the quantitative language. So these tests assess comprehensions of quantitative terms and knowledge of ordinal numbers and simple mathematical operations. The next level is the level 2. So first is the beginning consonants. So there are 4 pictures representing familiar objects are presented in the test booklet and or named by the examiners. So the examiner then supplies a fifth word. It is not presented and the child must select the picture that begins with the same sound. Next is the sound letter correspondence. So a picture will be presented followed by a series of letters. So the examiners will name the pictures and the child select the choice that corresponds to the beginning sound of the pictured item. Third is the visual matching. So as in the corresponding subtest at level 1, a model is presented and the child must select the choice that matches the model. Fourth is the finding patterns. So, a stimulus consisting of several symbols is presented, followed by a series of representative options, and the child must select the options that contains the same sequence of symbols, even though they are presented in a larger grouping with more distractions. Next is listening. So, material is orally presented and the child must select the pictures that reflects comprehensions of and drawing conclusions about the stimulus materials. Lastly is the quantitative concepts and quantitative operation. So there are 2 optional tests designed to gauge knowledge of basic mathematical concept and operations. Next is the educational assessment and in an Eastern perspective. So, in Western culture, they are an individualist competitive culture like the one that exists in the United States. So, people are encouraged to take personal responsibility for their actions, their accomplishments, and their struggles. So, the students are expected to step up to the plate and give their personal best to achieve good grades. The role of the parents, teachers, and others, they can give encouragements, hire tutors, and help in sundry other ways, but ultimately, responsibility for the academic success resides only with the student. So, as the times goes on, the role of the teachers, parents, and others in the community with regard to the education of an individual diminishes. So, in such system, it is who the individual will ultimately take responsibilities for their academic success or failure. And by contrast, in Eastern culture, they are an collective and cooperative cultures like the one exists in China and Japan. So, family members, teachers, and even other peers are expected to share a good deal of the responsibility for the individual student's learning and achievement. So, the degree of this shared responsibility tends to grow into mutual obligation as the students progress through the educational system. So, this culture encourages individual to forego personal goals and to relegate personal ambitions to a priority that is secondary to service of others. So in this system, credit for the success of a single individual or student is shared by many. Another contrast may be drawn with regard to Eastern versus Western perspective on innate ability, vice versa academic achievement. So, um, Wu compared the Eastern versus Western theoretical assumptions on this topic. So, in Chinese literature, giftedness as an innate ability was de-emphasized. So, they are consistent with a Confucian perspective that places great emphasis on effort and perseverance. Giftedness was alternatively conceptualized as talented performance. So, in general, deficiencies in academic achievement will be attributed not to differences in innate ability, but rather to lack of motivations, diligence, or perseverance on the part of the students. So, according to this view, the academic success is more the product of effort, perseverance, and motivation, and less the product of winning combination of our genes. By contrast, the Western culture seems to embrace the more nativist position that not everyone is equally built, so or genetically prepared for academic achievement. So this view encourages that members of the society will pursue paths of self-fulfillment based on their natural gift, abilities, and aptitude. So, from this Western perspective, the differential progress in academic mastery is to be expected, and accommodation must be made for both the academically gifted and the academically challenged.
Perhaps the most obvious example of an aptitude test widely used in schools at the secondary level is the SAT, which until 1993 went by the name Scholastic Aptitude Test. The test has been of value not only in college selection process but also as an aid to high school guidance and job placement counselors. It has value in helping students decide whether further academics, vocational training, or some other course of action would be most advisable. So SAT data is also used by organization and government agency in determining who will receive scholarship, grants, and other such award. So what is collectively referred to as the SAT? It is actually a number of tests that consist of a multi-part test referred to as SAT, which contains measures of reading, writing, and mathematics, and SAT subject test. Reading is measured through reading comprehension task as measured by short passages followed by sentence completion items. The mathematics section probes knowledge of subjects such as algebra, geometry, basic statistics, and probability. So the writing portion of the exam test knowledge of grammar, usage, and word of choice, and is tested through both multiple choice items and an essay question. So, the SAT subject test are 1 hour long tests designed to measure achievement in a specific subject area such as English, history, and social studies, mathematics, science, and languages. College may be required or recommended taking a specific subject test for purpose of admission or placement or simply to advise students about the course selection. Next is the ACT assessment, commonly referred to by its letters ACT and not by rhyming it with fact, serves a purpose that is similar to the SATs.
Formerly known as the American College Testing Program, the ACT was developed at the University of Iowa. So, correct me if I'm wrong sa pag-pronounce ng Iowa. And this college entrance examination was an outgrowth of the Iowa Test of Educational Development. The test is curriculum-based with questions directly based on typical high school subject areas. One study comparing the ACT with the SAT found that the tests were highly correlated with each other and in many respects, and that both were highly correlated with general intelligence. So scores on the ACT may be predictive of creativity as well as academic success. Such findings are noteworthy in the light of assertions that the lack of creativity-related items on college aptitude tests is a critical omission. So in this vein, Kaufman proposed that the inclusion of creativity items on college aptitude tests may be a way to further reduce possible biases. College level and beyond. So this long-standing rite of passage for students seeking admission to graduate school has a general test form as well as specific subject test. The general test contains a verbal and quantitative section as well as analytical writing sections. The verbal subtest stops, among other things, the ability to analyze and evaluate written materials as well as the ability to recognize relationship between concepts. The quantitative subtest stops, among other things, knowledge of basic mathematical concepts and the ability to reason quantitatively, and the analytical writing subtest stops, among other things, critical thinking and the ability to articulate and argue ideas effectively in standard written English. And the general test may be taken by paper and pencil or by computer at a test center. So if it is taken by a computer, the test taker uses an elementary word processor devised by the test developer so that the person familiar with one or another commercially available word processing program will not have an advantage. Essays written by respondents may be sent in their entirety to graduate institutions receiving the GRE test reports. And another widely used examination is the Miller Analogies Test, or the MAT. So this is a 100-item multiple choice analogy test that draws not only on the examinee's ability to perceive relationship but also on a general intelligence, vocabulary, and academic learning. As an example, complete the following analogy. So, successful completion of this item demands not only the ability to understand the relationship between classical conditioning and Pavlov, but also the knowledge that it was B.F. Skinner, the choice C, whose name of those listed is best associated with operant conditioning. So, sorry for sa PPT na ko, Freud ang akong na koloran, but it is Skinner who is best associated with operant conditioning po. So, letter C ang answer din na. Next is other aptitude test, the MCAT, the Medical College Admission Test, the Seizure Measure Musical Talents, the Horn Art Aptitude Inventory. So, applicants for training in certain profession and occupation may be required to take a specialized entrance examination. So for example, ang undergraduate student interested in pursuing a career in medicine, including pediatry or osteopathy, will probably be required to sit for a medical college admission test, or the MCAT. So, and some entrance examination for professional occupational training is the Law School Admission Test, the LSAT, Veterinary College Admission Test, the VCAT, Dental Admission Test, the DAT, Pharmacy College Admission Test, the PCAT, the Optometry Admission Test, or the OAT, and many more. Next is the diagnostic test. So by early 20th century, it was recognized that the test of intelligence could be used to do more than simply measure cognitive ability. Bennett and Simon wrote a wrote their concept of mental orthopedics, whereby intelligent test data could be used to improve learning. So today, a distinction is made between test and the test data used primarily for evaluative purposes and the test and test data used primarily for diagnostic purposes. So the term evaluative as used in phrases such as evaluative purposes or evaluative information is typically applied to tests or test data that are used to make judgment such as pass or fail and admit or reject decision. So by contrast, diagnostic information as used in educational context and related phrases such as diagnostic purposes is typically applied to test or test data used to pinpoint a student's difficulty, usually for remedial purposes. And in educational context, a diagnostic test is a tool used to identify areas of deficit to be targeted for intervention. And a diagnostic reading test may, for example, contain a number of subsets. So each subset is designed to analyze a specific knowledge or skill required for reading. The objective of each of these subtests might be to bring into focus the specific problems that need to be addressed if the test taker is to read at an appropriate grade level. So by the way, the line between the diagnostic and evaluative testing is not carved in a stone. So diagnostic information can be used for evaluative purposes, and information from evaluative tests can provide diagnostic information. So for example, on the basis of a child's performance and diagnostic reading test, the teacher or an administrator might make a class placement decision. So, ang akong isulti is, ang evaluative testing, magamit siya for diagnostic information, as also the diagnostic information, magamit siya for evaluative purposes. Next is reading test. The ability to read is integral to virtually all classroom learning. So it is not surprising that a number of diagnostic tests are available to help pinpoint difficulties in acquiring this skill. Some of the many tests available to help pinpoint reading difficulties include the Stanford Diagnostic Reading Test, the Metropolitan Reading Instructional Test, the Diagnostic Reading Scales, and the Jurel Analysis of Reading Test. So for illustrative purposes, we briefly describe one such diagnostic battery, the Woodcock Reading Mastery Test Revised Edition. So this paper and pencil measure of reading readiness, reading achievement, and reading difficulty takes between 15 to 45 minutes to administer the entire battery. It can be used with the children as young as 4.5 and adults as old as 80 and most everyone in between. So this edition of the test was standardized on a nationally representative sample totaling over 3,300 test takers. Users of prior edition of this popular test will recognize many of the subtests on the Woodcock Reading Mastery Test 3, with revised artwork to be more engaging, including the letter identification, word identification, word attack, word comprehension, and passage comprehension. So all of the subsets or subtests taken together are used to derive a picture of a test takers' reading-related strengths and weaknesses, as well as an actionable plan for reading remediation when necessary. The test comes in parallel forms, useful for establishing a baseline and then monitoring post-intervention programs. Next is the math test. The Stanford Diagnostic Mathematics Test 4th edition and the KMath 3 Diagnostic System or the KMath 3DA are two of many tests that have been developed to help diagnose difficulties with arithmetic and mathematical concepts. Items on such tests typically test everything from knowledge of basic concepts and operations through applications entailing increasingly advanced problem-solving skills. So the KMath 3-DA is a standardized test that may be administered to children as young as 4.5 and adults as old as 21. So the test comes in two forms, each containing 10 subtests. The test protocols can either be hand-scored or computer-scored. Because the KMath 3-DA is individually administered, it is ideally administered by a qualified examiner who is skillful in establishing and maintaining rapport with the test takers and knowledgeable in following the test standardized procedure. Next one is the Stanford Diagnostic Mathematics Test 4th edition or the SDMT4. So it is a standardized test that can provide useful diagnostic insight with regard to the mathematical abilities of children just entering school to just entering college. The test, available in different forms, is amenable for individual or group administration. It contains both multiple choice and optional free response items. The latter items are designed to provide the examiner with a first-hand understanding of the reasoning strategies and methods applied by test takers to solve different kinds of problems. The test protocols may be hand-scored or centrally scored by the test publisher. So since 2003, an online version of the SDMT-4 has been available. Next is the psychoeducational test batteries, are test kits that generally contain two types of tests: those that measures abilities related to academic success and those that measure educational achievement in areas such as reading and arithmetic. Data derived from these batteries allow for normative comparison, how the students compares with other students within the same age group, as well as an evaluation of the test takers' own strengths and weaknesses. All the better to plan educational interventions. So let's begin with a brief look at one psychoeducational battery, the Kaufman Assessment Battery for Children or the KABC, and the Kaufman Assessment Battery for Children second edition, the KABC 2. So the KABC was developed by a husband and wife team of psychologists. The KABC was designed for use with test takers from age 2.5 through age 12.5. Subtests measuring both intelligence and achievement are included. The KABC intelligence subtests are divided into two groups reflecting the two kinds of information processing skills identified by Loria and his students: simultaneous skills and sequential skills. Simultaneous skills and sequential skills. So, factor analytic studies of the KABC have confirmed that the presence of a factor researchers labeled simultaneous processing and a factor labeled sequential processing. Perhaps surprisingly, it is an achievement for a factor that researchers have had difficulty finding. So, Kaufman, 1993, found evidence for the presence of an achievement factor factor, but independent researchers have different ideas about what that third factor is. Good and Lane, 1988, identified the third factor of the KABC as verbal comprehension and reading achievement, while Kaufman and McLean 1986 identified it as achievement and reading ability. As Keith and Novak 1987 identified it as reading achievement and verbal reasoning. Whatever the factor is, the KABC achievement scale has been shown to predict achievement. So, recommendation for teaching based on the Kaufman and Kaufman's concept of processing strength can be derived from the KABC test finding. It may be recommended that, for example, a student whose strength is processing sequentially should be taught using the teaching guidelines for sequential learners, while the students who do not have any particular processing strength may be taught using a combination of methods. Next is the next generation of the KABC was published. The next generation of the KABC was published in 2004. And the abbreviation for the title of this test, the authors dropped the hyphen between the K and the ABC and instead inserted a hyphen between the C and the Roman numeral 2. So the KABC-2. But that was only the beginning. There are changes in the age range covered, the structure of the test, and even the conceptual underpinnings of the test. The age range for the second edition of the test was extended upward, ages 3 to 18, in order to expand the possibility of making ability achievement comparisons with the same test through high school. Structurally, 10 new subtests were created, while 8 of the existing subtests were removed, and only 8 of the 8 original subtests remained. Such significant structural changes in the test must be kept in mind by test users making comparisons between test takers' K-ABC scores and KABC-2 scores. Lastly, the Woodcock-Johnson 4 or the WJ4 was a psychoeducational test package consisting of 2 Connor batteries, the test of achievement and the test of cognitive abilities. The WJ4 consists of 3 Connor test batteries. Joining the achievement and cognitive ability test is a battery test designed to measure the oral language abilities. Included in the latter battery are tests targeting, for example, listening, comprehension, and speed of lexical access. There are a total of 12 tests in the test of oral language battery, including 9 English language tests and 3 parallel tests in Spanish. The battery may be used to gauge proficiency in English or Spanish and to evaluate various aspects of oral language. The better to assess and understand and assess his performance on reading, writing, and related tasks. According to the WJ4 manual, the battery may be used with a person as young as 2 and as old as 90 or older. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you've learned something from me. Bye!